disasters, or to dog the president with questions about foreign affairs. The occasional story about a foreign culture's quirky traditions might appear near the end of a newscast, but international stories of any stripe, and especially those about a land as far from U.S. shores as Japan, generally receive short shrift. The Nikkei rose or fell, a typhoon tore through Tokyo. That's about it. But that has begun to change, and I began to notice the shift in the early years of this century. There is still an enormous imbalance of attention, of course. America dominates the global discourse for reasons good and bad in positive and negative ways. But since that evening in Los Angeles, I have started seeing a lot more copies of My Neighbor Totoro and other Miyazaki films in American friends' living rooms, and also seeing more Pokemon figures on the sides of buses, more Akira posters on college campuses, and more Japanese or Japanese-influenced titles of all types on American television. Though I am naturally more sensitive to them, references to Japan as having a cool or attractive culture are not likely to surprise anyone in the 21st century. The questions are, why Japan and why now? So, just to summarize quickly, this book is an attempt actually to explore what I call the third wave of Japanophilia. You could go trace back to the 18th and 19th centuries when European artists in particular discovered artists such as Hiroshige and Hokusai and the woodblock print, and of course Van Gogh most famously was heavily influenced by Japanese artists and their approach to, particularly the approach to the use of line and manipulating line in an illustration as opposed to chiaroscuro or depth perception. Then again, there was a boom in the 1950s when the beatniks and poets and writers became immersed in Japanese haiku poetry, the art of Zen. Probably the best example is, in terms of poetry, was Ezra Pound, who got into Japanese and Chinese poetry and tried to influence T.S. Eliot in those directions. So there was a boom in the 1950s of interest in Japan, but what distinguishes the current boom, and this is what I try to address in the book, is that it's a real fascination with the products of contemporary Japanese culture. So instead of ikebana, flower arranging, or Zen, or the art of the tea ceremony, current Americans and Europeans, of course, are fascinated with the art of contemporary Japan. What's happening in fashion on the streets of Harajuku, which is a hip neighborhood in Tokyo. What's happening, what are the latest in cuisines coming out of Japan, and how we can adopt those in American restaurants. And of course what's happening in manga and anime, and to a rising extent popular music and style, graphic design. So the interest today on behalf of the West in general is targeted at contemporary Japan, and that's a comparatively new phenomenon, that people are interested in what's going on in the Japan of today. And the book is an attempt to discover why that might be happening now, and how it's happening. And so I just want to close by saying that, again, and this is, I'm very honored to have a publisher, but it really is less about how Japanese pop culture has invaded the United States, and much more about how young Americans have demanded Japanese popular culture from Japan, and also about the struggles inherent in that transcultural exchange, where the demand is there, but very often the supply line is not functioning very smoothly. So that's perhaps something we can talk about at another point. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you, Roland. All right, last, certainly not least, Mr. Kennedy, James Kennedy. He'll be reading from the Order of Odd Fish. We're going back to, I guess it's more youthful literature. Yes. So, right, you say
yes,
here? Yes. This book is a Smithsonian's notable book from 2008. Congratulations. And you're based in Chicago.
That's right.
Right. Okay.
Oh, thank you. So the name of the book is The Order of Odd Fish, and just a quick summary of it. It's about this girl, Jo LaRouche, and she is found in a washing machine with a note that says that she is a dangerous baby. and she's like picked up by this kind of old, like eccentric like actress in the 1950s who's now like 82 years old and kind of past her prime. And there's this kind of mystery of like where she was born and why. Well, it turns out she was born in this place called Eldritch City, this kind of fantastical city, but she had to be taken away from there because her birth caused this huge disaster and tragedy in Eldritch City. A lot of people died because this cult called the Silent Sisters believed that she was a reincarnation of their world-devouring goddess, the all-devouring mother. So she's taken out of that world, and now 13 years later she comes back to Eldritch City, but she can't tell anybody who she is. She has to be there incognito, or else everybody will turn against her, just as they had 13 years ago. So she and her aunt join the Order of Oddfish. It's a group of knights that research useless information. Like one knight researches unusual smells, another knight researches like pointless weaponry or the art of dithering and wasting time. They go on quests in the city, and they fly around on armored ostriches, and Joe makes friends with this group of very foppish cockroaches that are about 3 feet tall and kind of always being written about in the newspapers. But she finds that little by little this prophecy about her is coming true. She is turning into this world-devouring demon. She has to find some way to stop this prophecy from coming true before she devours the city that she's kind of fallen in love with and all these friends that she's come to be so close with. So I'm going to read 2 short parts. The first part, so there's the Knights of the Oddfish, and they're the adults. And the squires are the knights' assistants, and those are teenagers, and they all live together in this lodge. And this one day, the knights decide they want to go out and hunt this animal called the Schwenk, this monster that's loose in Eldritch City. And Sir Festus decides this is a perfect opportunity to use something from his collection of pointless weaponry. And so they're giving the squires all these weapons, and he's explaining them. So I start, and the name of the main character is Joe. So Umberto finished distributing the weapons to the squires. Each weapon was unlike the others. Some were unlike anything else on Earth. Ian was given a tiny, thin, jewel-encrusted tube. Daphne held a damp mass of prickly fur between her thumb and forefinger, looking confused over what to do next. And Dugan was unsuccessfully wrestling with a weapon that resembled a hissing, gurgling clump of old computer parts. "Of course," said Sir Festus breezily, "it's only fair to warn you that I have little idea how these weapons work, or what they actually do." "You don't know what these weapons do?" said Albert. "Oh, I was hoping you'd help me figure that out." "Well, I do know about some of them." Sir Festus took the spiky gun from Joe. "This is one of the most impressive weapons in my arsenal, and a personal favorite. A long-range, triple accuracy, apology gun." "Doesn't sound so impressive," said Joe. "Are you off your head, girl? The apology gun is most impressive and quite ancient. This little lovely goes back to the legendary war between the Vondorians and Snoo-Snids, known to history as the Very Polite War." By now, Joe could tell when Sir Festus was about to launch into one of his long, confusing, tedious stories. His mustache perked up. He licked his lips, and he wiggled his fingers with delight, beginning, "The Vondorians were renowned throughout the ancient world for their etiquette. Their civilization had a proper way to do everything, from opening a door to proposing marriage. Their entire lives were elaborate ceremonies in which you were required to recite a certain 1,000-line poem every time you bumped into someone in the street, or do a traditional dance every time you took off your hat. Every action of a Vondorian was ritualized and beautiful. But then the Vondorians came up against the Snoo-Snids. The Snoo-Snids were ruthlessly, dangerously polite. They were masters of the deadly thank you note, the murderous curtsy, the lethal tea party. It was rumored the Snoo-Snids had a special way of saying, "Excuse me," that could kill you instantly. Snoo-Snid assassins were so charming and courteous, their victims would literally die of tact. So, when the Snoo-Snids declared war on the Vondorians, because of a disagreement over the placement of a soup spoon at a diplomatic dinner, it was one of the strangest wars in history. Luckily, some artifacts of the war still survive, such as the apology gun,